Greetings, traveler. Have you ever been in a situation when you're developing a game and for the first time showing it to new players, having them complain that the game is just too hard? The players find the game too hard, it's very difficult to continue into the game, they feel that perhaps they're lacking necessary knowledge to proceed into the game, and this ultimately makes them feel that this game is not really for them and it makes them quit. Now, this is an unfortunate situation, but it happens very often in the games industry. So I want to talk about how this phenomenon happens and a super easy way for dealing with it after you identify it. My name is Xanthos. I've been working in the games industry for over 14 years now, and something that happens to every team inevitably is when we develop a game for months and years, we are so intimately aware of everything inside the game. We know all the abilities, all the behaviors of the enemies and so on, that we don't feel the difficulty of the game. This is sometimes called tunnel vision, getting tunnel vision about the project. So even though the game might have things it's not explaining really well at this point, or things that are difficult to understand that just we happen to know because the person who made the ability or the weapon or something explained it directly to us in the development team. These things happen to the team, but when new players get to play the game, they don't know any of that. They just see what's in front of them. So unless there's somebody there to explain how the game works, they might get stuck on defeating an enemy or passing an obstacle or solving a puzzle and so on. Or simply sometimes they get stuck on not knowing what to do next, right? So some of these issues happen because there's a certain challenge that the game sets that the player doesn't feel equipped with to defeat this challenge. So when the player comes up to this next enemy, he's not a little stronger than all the other enemies. Maybe he's 5 times or 10 times stronger. Of course, the development team understands why this is so and what you're supposed to do to defeat him, but a new player doesn't have this knowledge, so they might get stuck on this challenge. So this is the situation of how this happens, and the hard mode of dealing with this is, and this is unfortunately something that not only I've experienced before, I've done myself, so I'm the biggest sinner in this situation. So when players complain that this is too hard or I don't understand what I have to do, in the past I have said, well, you just need to try harder, you just need to play more and understand the game, which sounds logical, but in reality it's too much of a time investment for the player. Why is that the case? Because everything in the game up to that point was very doable, very easy to progress and so on. And then when the player comes up to this super hard enemy that they have to defeat to proceed into the game, the enemy is so much harder that yes, if the player spent 5 times or 10 times the time they spend in the rest of the game, they could possibly defeat the enemy, but it's just not worth the possible enjoyment from defeating the enemy. That investment is not worth the pleasure of defeating the enemy, right? So spending all this amount of time just to defeat the next enemy doesn't seem like it's worthwhile. So that's when players feel that the game is too hard or it's not for them, or they might phrase it differently because humans sometimes we're just not sure what's wrong or how to put it into words. So sometimes our complaints are not well placed, but the fact that there's dissatisfaction with the situation is of course obvious. So what can we do to deal with this the easy way? Well, what I found out is we can use the same process that brought the player all the way to that point in the game to solve why the player thinks that this next enemy or this next puzzle or challenge is too difficult. And basically what it comes down to is a simple test that I put together to see if the next challenge is of appropriate difficulty. So when the player starts the game, there's the tutorial, right, where the game explains the basic movement and so on. This is easy for a player to do because all they need to do is literally press a button. It's an easy thing to do. Then once the player gets used to the movement, then we ask them to go somewhere or to do something. The very subtle but very important point here is to get an intuitive feeling about what the next task feels like to the player. So if the player hears, now move to this next location, he's feeling confident that he can complete this task because he has previously moved to a perhaps shorter location before. So he thinks, I've done this before, I could definitely do this again. Yes, it's a bit further than I've gone before, but based on my previous experience, I feel confident I can do this. So this is one little tiny step in the reasoning process in the game, but it's important for the player to think, okay, I can do this. But if we ask the player, okay, now that you know the controls, go defeat the last boss, the player would think, how could I do that? So when we're designing the next challenge, the next objective in the game and so on, as soon as we introduce what the next objective is, this tiny little check needs to happen in the player's mind. So when we say, okay, you defeated one enemy, now defeat a slightly harder enemy, the player will think, okay, last time when I defeated the enemy, I still had health and resources left over, so if I use some of those, I could probably take on the next enemy. Or if it's a very fast-paced game where you don't have the time to really introduce the next objective and explain it and so on, and it's this kind of game where you show an enemy, you're expecting the player to quickly grasp the situation, understand what the enemy's weaknesses are, and use them to defeat the enemy, then as soon as that introduction happens, that tiny step in the player's mind will also happen. When they see that the enemy is showing some weaknesses or is showing some visual cues about how to be defeated, the player must feel that I can do this. Based on my current capabilities, based on more specifically what I've done up to now in the game, I believe I can do this. So I defeated 4 enemies at once. Before, there's a fairly good chance I can defeat 5 enemies. The previous boss had a mechanic where I need to use fire damage instead of my normal damage, and I did that. So I feel confident I can use fire damage to defeat the enemies that need it from now on. So there is a pitfall here because we, as designers, we think, well, I'm making the game for potentially everybody out there in the world. How could I possibly anticipate all the different play styles and all the different angles of attack and moves that the player might do? Yes, this is indeed something you couldn't possibly anticipate. You don't know what everybody will do out there. But what we can anticipate and what we can in fact design for is the challenge that the game presents itself, right? So we don't know what the player is going to do, but we do know what the game is going to do. That's what I mean. So by building up the challenges little by little, we create this ladder for the player to ascend. So you can think of it like this. When the player starts the game, the only challenge is to find the controls, right? Very little step. Now, if the next step was defeat 10 enemies at once, probably that's too big of a step, too difficult a challenge. So maybe the next step should be try swinging your weapon, or try casting a spell, or something like that. Try driving your vehicle around. Something very, very simple that either introduces a new concept that is very easy for the player to understand, like press a new button or do a new move and so on, or builds upon the previous capabilities that we had the player learn and we tested that they can manage to get through. So if the player moved to a short location using the controls, we can ask the player to move further away next. If the player defeated 3 enemies at once, we can ask him to defeat 4 enemies for the first challenge. And I'm going to stress this again because this is really the point of what I'm trying to get to here is this isn't really about the player performing the task. And successfully clearing the challenge. We're not at that stage. We're not at that stage yet. We're at the stage where the player simply discovers the next challenge, whether it's an enemy or a puzzle or whatever. So when the player discovers the next challenge and sees how the game presents that challenge to the player, that should be something that the player thinks, I can do this. And this is not a subjective I can do this. It's not about confidence and bravado or anything like that. It's simply a build-up of skills of everything we've put in the game up to that point for the player. So if the player manages to think, based on what I've done before, I could take one more enemy, or I could go somewhere further away, or I could solve this slightly more complicated looking puzzle. When the player makes that logical decision to confidently take on the next challenge, then he will most definitely avoid the thought that, this next thing is too difficult for me, there's no way I could clear this, this game is silly, I'm putting it down. So why is this so important, right? Why are we attacking this issue at the conceptual stage? There's two parts to this. The first part is the player side, and the other part is the design side, right? We need these two components to be able to tackle this effectively. First, the player must think that this is a challenge they can clear, that they don't stop at the evaluation stage. And the second part is, when they make that decision, they need to actually experience the expected result inside the game. We don't want to teach the players that, everything looks easy, but it's actually super duper hard. No, we want to make the game world more believable, and we want to build this trust with the player, that the way we teach him to evaluate things in the game is the way that he should evaluate them. So by making sure that the next challenge is something that the player feels he can do, then we equip him with the logical process, with the confidence to take on the next task. And when he does take on the next task, we make sure that it's actually something that they could do. So then the next monster doesn't have like 100 times more hit points. It's proportionate to the previous challenges. So we build the player's confidence. We make sure that the game design backs up the claim that we make when we present the challenge to the player. And with those two together, the player can take on the next challenge, get the expected results, feel that he trusts the game more to bring things to him at a pace he can enjoy, because remember, that's the point. And then he can continue through the game and avoid this feeling that this enemy is too hard, and there's no way I could clear this game is weird, and so on. So hopefully that helps navigate this situation. Like I said, I've made this mistake tons of times in the past, and I was always wondering, why are players quitting? This game is easy. Of course, I was thinking the game is easy because I made it and because I've been experiencing it for so long. But my responsibility is not to myself, it's to the players. So in my case, that framework helped me to evaluate both how I design the game and I design every single challenge in the game, and also get a better understanding of how somebody who sees this for the first time feels, and whether in fact the experience is enjoyable, not just from engaging in the challenges, but from the moment the challenges are discovered. From that point, the player must think, oh, okay, yeah, that sounds fun. Probably because it looks a little bit more difficult, the rewards are also going to be a little bit better. So yeah, I think I would have fun, tackling this challenge. Anyway, I hope this helps. I know this is a nuanced topic, so if you have questions about it, please let me know. I will do my best to answer. And as always, have fun.